Today's video is a complete guide to teaming and subcontracting. I've been in this business a long time and I don't know anyone who does it alone. Pretty much everyone teams, everyone subcontracts. And you've probably heard lots of people talking about subcontracting. But what concerns me is people use that term subcontracting to refer to different things that have different rules, and there are some minefields out there if you don't know those rules. So this video breaks down the 3 different ways that you can subcontract and what you need to know about each. And bear in mind, it's not either or. Many companies do all 3. And I'm going to answer the big questions on this topic, including if you prefer to work as a subcontractor, how do you find those subcontracting jobs? And then let's say you want to bid on a big government contract, but you don't have the capability in-house to do all of the work. So you want to subcontract out a piece of it. How do you manage cash flow? When do you have to pay your subcontractors? And what do you list for past performance when you're a new company just starting out? And then we're going to get into the details of the important government rule called Limitations on Subcontracting, so you know how much of the work you can subcontract to others. Okay, we'll cover all of that, but let's start at the beginning. And let's start with an example. Let's say you're a geologist. You've got a one-person geology business, and you find a solicitation where they're asking for 5 geologists. What to do? Well, you could hire 4 other geologists, but then you'd have to manage that payroll while waiting for the government to pay your invoices. Instead, you decide to reach out to other geologists, and you put together a team to bid on the contract. That lets you spread the resource demands. And by teaming, by splitting the burden among the team members, that allows companies to pursue larger opportunities that they simply would not be able to manage otherwise. For example, if those geologists were your employees, you'd be paying them before you get paid by the government. But if you have businesses teaming together, you can negotiate with those businesses to pay them after the government pays the invoice. Now, when you submit the proposal, you explain your team and you present the experience of each of the 5 geologists. So the proposal talks about the team and its experience. But here's the thing you need to be clear on. The government doesn't give contracts to teams. The government signs a contract with one prime contractor for every contract award. Okay, there is an asterisk on that last statement. There are more complicated things like joint ventures, but that's really an advanced topic for another course. Let's ignore that for the moment because I want to keep this simple. So one company is going to sign the contract with the government. You'll hear people refer to this as the prime contractor. And the prime has to do the invoicing, the contract management, and all the bureaucratic items required to operate a government contract. And ultimately, the prime is the one who's responsible for performing the contract. The other members of your team are going to be subcontractors to the prime. Now, who should be the prime? You put together the team, so maybe it's you, but it doesn't have to be you. And there are lots of reasons why it may make sense to let your teaming partner be the prime contractor, and then you're a subcontractor to them. Remember, the prime contractor has lots of requirements they have to comply with. Maybe you don't have the resources today to comply with all the requirements. Or maybe you just don't want that headache. Consider just the case of proposal writing. If you're the prime, you're ultimately the one responsible for preparing and submitting the proposal, including putting together the best pricing and crafting the technical approach to meet the government's requirements. You may simply not have the free time to do it. Or maybe you haven't written a government proposal before and your teaming partner knows how to do it. So this would be a learning experience for you. Yes, your teammates, your proposed subcontractors, they will help, but the bulk of the work is going to fall to the prime. So for all these reasons, you might prefer to be a subcontractor on the team rather than the prime. And a question I get asked a lot is, how do I find these teaming partners? In my business, we always made an effort to maintain good relationships with the other companies in our industry, because the company you're competing against today may be your teaming partner tomorrow. This happens all the time in government contracting. Companies may compete against each other to win one contract, and then the next month they team with each other to bid on another contract. In fact, I've seen companies forming teams with their top competitors just to avoid having to compete with them for a contract they wanted. A great way to find these companies is to attend industry events, professional society meetings, anywhere that the people in your industry meet. I also recommend attending government Meet the Buyer events. There, you'll meet other small businesses that are interested in government contracts. And another thing I recommend is searching the government database of contract awards to find the small businesses that are winning government contracts in your field, because these are potential teaming partners for you. I'm showing you here one of those websites, fpds.gov. Searching FPDS is a bit tricky, so I made a video that walks you through how to use FPDS to find the small businesses that are winning government contracts. And I've put a link to that video in the notes below. There's one other piece to this, and I received this great question from a viewer, which I'm showing you here. She's asking about the case where she's basically a consultant, helping the prime with preparing the proposal, and then she assists with project management and contract management. Well, the simplest way to structure this is to be paid for your time. Sometimes people negotiate hourly billing rates. Sometimes people negotiate fixed weekly or monthly rates. That depends on the details of the work and also your and your customer's preferences. But here's another structure you could use. If your goal is to build your company's resume so that you can ultimately bid on contracts as the prime contractor yourself, then you can negotiate with the prime that you'll help prepare the proposal, and in return, you want your company to receive a defined piece of the contract work. Both approaches are pretty common. It just depends on your objectives. So our previous example was of pulling together a team of small businesses to bid on a government contract. Now the second case is subcontracting to a large prime that's been awarded a large government contract. I'm talking here about billion-dollar companies. Think a big company like Bechtel or Lockheed Martin. Unlike our previous case, you're not involved in bidding on the government contract. The large business has already won the contract, and you're going to them for a subcontract. See, when one of these big companies wins a big federal contract, that contract often requires that they subcontract out part of the work to small businesses. This is called a subcontracting plan, and most large federal contracts require one. And I want to talk about this case because many small businesses start out as a subcontractor on these large government projects, and they use that to build experience. And then they start bidding on contracts themselves as the prime contractor. But it's not either or. Often companies will continue to work as a subcontractor on some jobs and as a prime contractor on other jobs. And here's the thing. I also know lots of savvy business owners who choose to always work as a subcontractor to large primes. Depending on your business and your goals, this could be a great strategy for you. So let's go over the reasons that make subcontracting to a large prime attractive to small businesses. One big reason companies start out as a subcontractor is that there's an awful lot to learn in government contracting. lots of rules and regulations, and confusing reporting requirements, and subcontracting allows you to get started without having to understand everything first. And a big advantage to working with a large prime is you get to learn from them. You get to learn their procedures. You get to learn how they execute a government contract. You get to see how they actually implement all those government rules and regulations. And you get to learn all this for free. Second, I've seen lots of niche contractors do really well by providing specialized services that large projects need. For example, I've known companies that specialized in things like data quality assurance or auditing. These are things that large prime contractors often need, and it's often easier for them to subcontract to obtain these specialized services than to build out the capability in-house. So companies with specialized expertise can do really well as a subcontractor. And the third reason you might prefer to be the subcontractor is financial. It takes resources, time and money to bid on and then manage a government contract. And you may not have those resources yet. So maybe you listen to this and you like the idea of starting out as a subcontractor to a large prime. How do you find those primes to subcontract with? Well, information about these large prime contracts is all free, publicly available information. And I'm going to walk you through how to use a free government website to find this information. Here, I'm on the website usaspending.gov, and I click here where it says Start Searching Awards. And on the left panel here are the filters you can use to create your search. Now, I recommend searching by location. So I scroll down to location and note that there are two different fields for location: place of performance and recipient location. The place of performance means where the contract work is done. The recipient location means the business address of the company. What you care about is the location where the work is performed. So I'm going to use these drop-downs to enter United States, then Washington State, and then Benton County. And now you have to click this Add Filter button for it to add that filter to your search. And now I want to narrow it down to just large contracts. So I scroll down to award amount, and I'll click on $500 million and above. And then I scroll down further and I hit the Submit Search button. And now we see a list of contracts with the recipient name, the start and end date of the contract, and the award amount. Now, I'm only interested in current contracts. So I'm going to go here where it says End Date and click the arrow to sort the table by descending end date. So now let's look at the results. Battelle Memorial Institute has a contract for $24 billion. And Central Plateau Cleanup Company has a contract for $723 million. And Washington River Protection Solutions has a contract for $9 billion. And if you click here on the company names, you can find out lots of information about the company and their contract awards. And then I recommend just searching online to find the company's website. But note that different companies use different terminology. So search for the company name and small business office or procurement, or try searching for the words doing business with and then the company name. Remember, these companies are required to subcontract part of the work. So with a little bit of searching, you should be able to find their website. Here, I just Googled Washington River Protection Solutions, and I got their homepage. And then I click here on Opportunities, Procurement and Contracting, and I get to this page. This is their procurement website, and you see it lists current requests for proposals, requests for information and expressions of interest, and upcoming events. And if you click here on Small Business, it shows you the name and contact information for the Small Business Program Manager. Okay, here's another example. I searched online for Central Plateau Cleanup Company, and I found their website. Here, I click on Suppliers and Contractors, and it provides links to their current solicitations, their small business office, and lots of information on how to get started doing business with them. And as I said, different companies call these things by slightly different names. Here, we see they're calling it their Small Business Advocacy Office. And they say the Small Business Advocacy Office is available to meet with suppliers one-on-one and facilitate vendor presentations with procurement personnel and management. And the website also provides the name and contact information for the Small Business Program Manager. Okay, let me explain something you may be puzzling about right now. We started out talking about big companies with well-known names, but these two companies I just showed you are probably not names you're familiar with. So what's going on? Well, many times for these really large government contracts, companies put together teams to bid on the contract, and they give their team a name. So in this case, Central Plateau Cleanup Company is a partnership of 3 big companies, Floor, Amentum, and Atkins. So when you're looking for them, say you're searching for one of their employees on LinkedIn, or you're searching for an upcoming event to attend, use the name on the contract, in this case, Central Plateau Cleanup Company. Let me also explain why I recommend that you start by searching for contracts where the work is performed near you. And there are 2 reasons for this. First, because personally, I think it's much better if you can get in your car and drive to meet with a potential customer face to face. And second, I've seen some prime contractors have a preference for subcontracting with small businesses within their own geographic region. So start by searching for contracts within driving distance, and then broadening your search as needed from there. And here's another tip. I've been contacted by many people who are searching for large businesses that have won contracts in their industry, in their NAICS code, and I always advise them to expand their search. Why do I say that? Well, let's say you're an accountant looking for an auditing contract. Well, when an engineering construction company wins a big construction contract, they're probably going to need auditors, and they probably don't have enough of them in-house. And so maybe they'll be looking to bring on subcontractors to perform that work. So a big construction contract may be a great target for you. Whereas if you were searching for companies that won a large auditing contract, well, they have auditors in-house. So maybe they don't need to hire subcontractors to do auditing. Instead, maybe they hire subcontractors to do janitorial or building maintenance. Now, to answer the question I receive most about this, what's the easiest way to meet these people? Well, often, these large businesses host small business outreach events, and they're a great way to meet buyers at the company and learn about upcoming subcontracting opportunities. These events are often listed on the company's website. But really, to find these events, you can just search online. And when you're searching for upcoming events, bear in mind that they go by different names. So try searching for small business event, meet the buyer, open house, vendor outreach, as well as government industry conferences and professional conferences. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the third case. Let's say you want to be the prime and you want to bring on a subcontractor to do part of the work. We talked about the benefits of subcontracting, but there are also lots of reasons why people prefer to be the prime. Often it's because they want to make more money and grow their business faster. And maybe you've heard about the increases in the number of federal contracts and increased dollar amounts of contracts being awarded to small businesses. And you see this as a way to win some big contracts to grow your business. And just so we're absolutely clear on this, there is nothing wrong with a growing small business subcontracting out part of the work on a government contract. And there are good reasons to do it. Maybe the subcontractor has a unique expertise that's needed to perform a piece of the work. Or maybe you don't have experience with a particular government customer, but you can bring on a subcontractor who the customer knows and trusts. And that'll give the government added confidence that your team can perform the work. So let's dive into the government rules that govern subcontracting, and I'll answer the questions I always get asked about this. And to help make this clear, I'm going to use the following example to illustrate the concepts in this section. Let's say you've got a geology company and you've got 5 geologists on staff, and you find a solicitation to bid on, but the agency is asking you to provide hydrologists as well as geologists. So you find a company specializing in hydrology to be your subcontractor. So here's the first question I always get asked. A viewer said to me, I thought you get awarded the contract first and then you find the subcontractors to do the work. Personally, I never did it that way. I always found my subcontractors before I submitted my proposal. And let me explain why. First, I want to include the experience of my team members in the proposal because that will strengthen the proposal. In our example of a solicitation that's asking for geologists and hydrologists, if I were writing that proposal, I'd include the names and resumes for each of the geologists and the hydrologists. And second, how do you know how to price the proposal if you haven't lined up your subcontractors? I would always find the subcontractors and get a bid from them. So I knew how to correctly price my bid to the government. And here's another tip. I would contact them as early as possible. If you were to call someone and say, I need your pricing right now for a bid that's due tomorrow, do you think they're going to give you their best price? Instead, I would contact potential subcontractors early and ask them to sharpen their pencils and give me their absolute best price. Another question I get asked a lot is about cash flow. Viewers ask, do I have to pay the subcontractors before I receive payment from the government? Well, this is something you can negotiate with them up front when you're discussing their price before you submit your proposal. As one example, you could negotiate that you pay them within 15 days of receipt of payment from the government. The next question I get asked a lot concerns the past performance requirements. When you're bidding on a government contract, often the solicitation will ask you to provide your past performance. So what if you're a relatively new business and you don't have a lot of previous contracts? What do you write down for past performance when you're preparing your proposal? Well, in practice, the way bidders often handle this is by teaming with a more experienced company and offering their subcontractors past performance. Also, sometimes you'll be able to get credit for your personal past experience and that of your key employees. There's a lot of misconceptions about this, so I want to show you what the rules actually say about this. If you've seen my other videos, you know I always want to read the regulations for myself. So let me show you 2 clauses relevant to this question. The first is the SBA's regulations at 13 CFR 125.2G. I'm showing it here, and it says, when an offer of a small business prime contractor includes a proposed team of small business subcontractors and specifically identifies the first-tier subcontractors in the proposal, the head of the agency must consider the capabilities, past performance, and experience of each first-tier subcontractor that is part of the team as the capabilities, past performance, and experience of the small business prime contractor. So this requires agencies to consider subcontractors' past performance, but it only applies to your first-tier subcontractors and when the subcontractor is a small business. Next, I want to show you the rule that applies to procurements conducted under Part 15 of the FAR, which governs contracting by negotiation. If you haven't heard that term before, FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. FAR 15305 covers proposal evaluation. I'm showing it here, and it says the evaluation should take into account past performance information regarding predecessor companies, key personnel who have relevant experience, or subcontractors that will perform major or critical aspects of the requirement. The thing I have to point out here is that it uses the word should. It doesn't use the word must. So, FAR 15305 permits, but doesn't require the agency to consider the experience of predecessor companies, key personnel, and subcontractors. So to bottom line this can be different for different contracts. So how do you find out whether the agency will consider the past performance of your subcontractors in evaluating your proposal? Well, the place to look for the answer to this question is in the solicitation for the contract that you're bidding on. Often in the section on evaluation criteria, it will answer this question explicitly. And if it doesn't, you may want to ask for clarification from the agency. A related question people ask is, how do I present the past performance of my subcontractors? Do I just kind of blend it all together with my experience? No, please be absolutely clear and precise in your proposal about who did what. This will make sense if you think about our example, our geology company, GeoCorp. Geo submits a proposal as the prime, but they have a subcontractor, Hydro, who did relevant work in the past for the Navy. But the way it's presented in the proposal, it sounds like Geo did the work. So they've submitted the proposal to an agency, and that agency goes to the Navy to check on Geo's references. And what happens? The Navy says, "We've never heard of Geo. We never gave them a contract." Now Geo's proposal gets thrown out. So the answer is, be really precise in your proposal and clearly explain whose past performance it is, what piece of the project will be doing, and also explain how their past performance is relevant to the proposed work. Moving on, the next question I get asked a lot concerns pricing. Typically, if you're the prime, you would put a small percentage markup on your subcontractor's work that would cover your administrative costs, things like invoicing. But bear in mind, you need to be price competitive to be awarded the contract. So often, you're going to pare that markup way down in order to keep your price competitive. I've even heard of cases where companies cut the markup down to zero in order to win the contract. Next, if you're looking to be the prime, there's a government rule that needs to be on your radar, and it's called Limitations on Subcontracting. This is the rule that answers the question, how much of the work are we allowed to subcontract? And note, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this question. Instead, the answer depends on the particular contract you're looking at, which is another reason why you want to carefully read the solicitation for the contract that you're interested in. So let's dive into this rule. First, I'm going to show you the actual FAR clause, and then we're going to walk through some examples to make it clearer. I'm showing you here FAR Clause 52219-14, Limitations on Subcontracting. And it starts out by defining the term similarly situated entity. It says similarly situated entity means a first-tier subcontractor, including an independent contractor, that 1. has the same small business program status as that which qualified the prime contractor for the award. For example, for a small business set-aside contract, that means any small business concern. And 2, is considered small for the size standard under the NAICS code the prime contractor assigned to the subcontract. Okay, that's a mouthful. First, let me explain why we care about this. We care about this because if work is performed by a subcontractor that's a similarly situated entity, it won't count against our limit on subcontracting. And we saw that to qualify as a similarly situated entity, the subcontractor has to meet 2 separate criteria. First, the subcontractor needs to have the same small business program status as that which qualified the prime for the award. For example, Let's say the contract is set aside for 8A certified companies. Your company is 8A, and you want to subcontract out part of the work to another company that's also 8A. Then that satisfies the first criterion. The second requirement is that the subcontractor has to qualify as a small business. And to determine whether a company qualifies as small, they look at the size standard of the NAICS code assigned to the subcontract. Let me explain that. Our subcontract is for hydrology services. So let's say you assign NAICS code 541690 to the subcontract. That's the code for other scientific and technical consulting services. And remember, each NAICS code has its own size standard. And that's important because it means a company might be small under one NAICS code, but not small under a different NAICS code. So next we look up the size standard for NAICS code 541690, and we see that it's $19 million. That means that to qualify as a small business for that subcontract, the company must have average annual receipts of less than $19 million. I know many of you are small businesses with no additional socioeconomic statuses. If the prime contract is a small business set-aside with no further socioeconomic requirements, then the subcontractor just needs to be a small business to qualify as a similarly situated entity. Okay, now let's go back to that FAR clause and read what it says about limitations on subcontracting. And the first thing we notice is that the limit depends on the type of contract. And they specify the limit separately for 4 different categories of contracts: services, supplies, general construction, and construction by special trade contractors. The first category is services except construction. A small business prime contractor providing services not including construction cannot pay more than 50% of the amount paid by the government to subcontractors that are not similarly situated entities. But note that any work that a similarly situated entity further subcontracts will count towards the prime contractor's 50% subcontract amount. The second category is supplies other than procurement from a non-manufacturer of such supplies. It says the prime will not pay more than 50% of the amount paid by the government, excluding the cost of materials, to subcontractors that are not similarly situated. And again, any work that a similarly situated entity further subcontracts will count toward the prime contractor's 50% subcontract amount. Now, the third category is general construction. And note that general construction is different. Here, the prime contractor cannot pay more than 85% of the amount paid by the government, excluding the cost of materials, to subcontractors that are not similarly situated. And any work that a similarly situated entity further subcontracts will count toward the prime contractor's 85% subcontract amount. And the fourth category is construction by special trade contractors. In this case, the prime contractor cannot pay more than 75% of the amount paid by the government, excluding the cost of materials, to subcontractors that are not similarly situated. And again, any work that a similarly situated entity further subcontracts does count toward the prime contractor's 75% subcontract amount. I want to quickly work through some examples to show how this works in practice. Let's say your business, GeoCorp, is 8A certified and you're bidding on a services contract that's set aside for 8A companies. But you need the help of HydroCorp to successfully perform the contract. Since you're a savvy business owner, you've carefully read the solicitation to see what requirements apply to the contract. And you see it's subject to the limitations on subcontracting. So let's look at different scenarios to understand how much of the work you as prime contractor can outsource to HydroCorp as your subcontractor. Case 1. HydroCorp is over the small business size standard, and so it's classified as an other than small business. Your business cannot pay Hydro more than half of the amount paid by the government. Case 2. HydroCorp is also an 8A certified small business. Now, you don't have to limit the amount paid to Hydro because it's a similarly situated entity. Case 3. HydroCorp is an 8A small business, but Hydro then further subcontracts out part of the work to XYZ Corp. You don't have to limit the amount paid to Hydro because they're similarly situated, but XYZ Corp can't be paid more than 50% of the total amount paid by the government. So what does this mean in practice? Well, what this typically means is that when you're the prime contractor, you just need to make sure that enough of the work is performed by people on your own payroll, your own employees, to meet the requirements that apply to your contract. And I bet some of you are thinking, well, what about 1099s? That is, what about those people who get paid on a 1099? Well, these people are not employees, so they're subcontractors, and they don't count toward the amount of the contract that has to be performed with your own employees. When you're looking at the limitations on subcontracting, know that there are exceptions and there are details on how you do the calculation. So I want you to know that there are law firms that specialize in government contracting. I'm showing you here an article written by one of them, and they can help you navigate this process and ensure you're working in compliance with the requirements that apply to your particular contract. Hey friends, government contracting is a great way to grow your business, but I want you to go into it with your eyes open, understanding that there are important rules to this. And I'm here to help you learn those rules because I've read through the rules and regulations and I've distilled it all down for you in my complete course on government contracting. I've spent thousands of hours learning this stuff, so you don't have to. So watch the rest of my complete course on government contracting to learn the very best distilled actions you can take to grow your business with government contracts. You'll find a link to the course in the notes below. And be sure to hit the like button and share the video with others who this might help. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time.